Well, hello everyone. This is Eric Chappell, Community Evangelist for InfraWorks 360, and I want to welcome you to today's webcast, Animating InfraWorks 360 Model Components Part 2. This time we are very fortunate to have Willy Campbell being our presenter. If you caught the first installment of this series, we had Dave Tyner, who is also on the line today to answer any questions and maybe add to Willie's presentation as well. So we're lucky to have both those guys with us today. Before we get into that, though, I just want to talk a little bit about our webcast series and our community for anyone who's new. We do this twice a month. It basically, we try to shoot for the first and third Wednesdays of the month, and the goals are pretty simple. We want to get the folks who use the product closer to the folks who make it. So we want to give you a look at the product from Autodesk's perspective, as far as digging in a little deeper and looking into the minds of the folks who typically the ones who make it. But in this case, we're going to also be dealing with Willie and Dave, who are support specialists who have to support the program and in that case have to really dig in deep sometimes to help you guys, our customers, with some things that they're challenged with. So really interesting perspective there. Our next webcast, this was born out of a video that Jerry Bartles did, and I'm going to assume that a lot of you know who Jerry is. He's a fantastic presenter. But he put a video together that just showed a whole bunch of interoperability between all the different products you see listed there and all the different examples: bridges, buildings, dealing with coordinate systems, water surfaces. And I really couldn't figure out what to call this webcast once Jerry agreed to do it. So I'm just calling it right now. This is a working title: the InfraWorks 360 Interoperability Bonanza, because Jerry is just going all over the place with different products, different examples, and all kinds of tips and tricks and how to get things to look great and line up and work great between these two products. Of course, it all centers around InfraWorks 360, and that's going to be part of the equation in all of the examples that he shows you. But he's going to show you some cool stuff. So don't miss that. Wednesday, January 6th, 12 to 1 Eastern, and we'll be putting out the information for you to register and reserve your spot on the different community channels that you see at the bottom there: the community site, the forum, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and some other places too. I'm going to do a poll now. If you're a regular attendee, you will recognize this poll because we do it every time. And this is about your current usage level with InfraWorks 360. So if you'd please provide your answer. We're trying to get a feel for where you are in your usage level of the product. So ranging from not even having it installed down to can't live without it. And over the months, we started this series back in April. We've seen a pretty strong trend toward down the list. So we started off kind of heavy on the first 2 or 3 answers, and now we're gravitating more toward the 4th answer. It looks like today, though, we're gonna break the mold a bit, and we've got a pretty even score between the 3rd and 4th answers. So looks like more people have joined today who are dabbling in InfraWorks 360, and that's actually pretty encouraging, because that means new people are coming on board and trying out the product. So I'm going to go ahead and close down that poll, and again, we've got a tie between I've dabbled in it and I regularly use it. So some interesting results there. Maybe we're going to see a new trend developing. So I'll close that poll down, and I want to tell you a little bit about our community. The main hub is at autodesk.com/InfraWorks360 community, and from here you can link out to our user forum, idea station, where you can tell our product team any ideas that you have for improving the product, or you can vote on ideas that your peers have posted and help crowdsource, so to speak, in getting those changes implemented in the software. Our product team regularly takes a look at the idea station, and they interact with it, and they ask questions and provide comments. So it's really interesting to see how some of these ideas develop. We've also got our InfraTips site, which is a listing of very short articles that are, only take a minute or two to read. They are quick productivity tips that will allow you to do more with InfraWorks 360. In fact, Willie here on the call today is one of our top contributors in the InfraTips site. So you probably, if you've been there, you've probably seen his name quite a bit. We also have the gallery where users can post images and videos of InfraWorks 360 projects that they're working on. So we'd love to see you all post your projects up there. If you're not interested in doing that, go on up there and see what some of your peers are up to with InfraWorks 360. There's some amazing stuff. Things you'd never think of doing with InfraWorks 360 are in the gallery. The Social Hub has feeds for Facebook, Twitter, bunch of blogs. So if you want a central location just to see what people are talking about in social media space, that's a great place for that. All of our videos, including recordings of past webcasts, can also be linked to from the main community hub here. So please check it out. Autodesk.com InfraWorks 360 community, and just this month we launched a new learning tab, so definitely check that out. It's the same website, autodesk.com/InfraWorks 360 community. If you click the learning tab, it'll take you to this new page, which I'm assuming a lot of the folks on the call maybe are already pretty solid with InfraWorks 360, but if you know folks who are just getting started, this is a great resource for them to navigate through the early parts of getting up and running with the software. I don't believe we're going to be talking about any preview features today, but just in case, we want to make sure we're clear that any discussion of preview features or labs features, this is not a promise that these features will actually exist in a future version of the software in a fully supported form. So don't make purchasing decisions based on anything that's labeled preview or labs. And a bunch of legal speak there that I will not read word for word. We really want to encourage you to ask questions. We've got Willie and Dave on the line and myself. We're going to ask you to use the question window. Unfortunately, the webcast attendance is too high for opening the phone lines, so we're going to take the questions that way. If there's a theme developing, or if we see some especially interesting questions, we may go ahead and interrupt Willie and ask them out loud and have him provide an answer. But by all means, please ask your questions. It just makes the presentation better to get some of that interaction with you guys. So with that, I'm going to turn over the stage to Willie, and it's all you now, Willie. Take it away.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Excellent. All right. All right. Thanks, Eric. So yeah, today we are going to continue on the path that Dave Tyner started us several weeks ago in the Webcast Series. Today we're going to start with InfraWorks. We're going to go to Civil 3D, then from Civil 3D into Studio Max, and then from Max back into InfraWorks. So as you can see, that all the versions that we're using are the current 2016 versions of the software, in case you're wondering about that. And so Dave started out this series a couple of weeks ago, and he intended to make it a three-part, but as we were kind of working our way through this process, we realized that we needed to sneak in another webinar, another webcast here, kind of in between part one and part two, just so, because there's too much information that would be skipped if we didn't otherwise. So that's why we're doing this today, kind of jumping in here. So today our goal is going to be animate vehicles along a chosen path. So we want the vehicles that we place in the product to be following the horizontal and vertical curves. So with that, I'm going to jump right into InfraWorks. And to save a little bit of time, I have already created a model builder project, and I created this segment of road here that you can see now highlighted. So what this is I've aptly dubbed this crazy road, and you can see the road name. This is a design road, meaning that I went through the road component tool and I used a design road rather than a component road or an InfraWorks sketch road that you can build here. The reason I didn't use a sketch road is because when I export the IMX file to bring into Civil 3D, I only get the horizontal curve information. Anything vertical does not translate across. And the reason that I did not choose to use a component road is because the component road actually applies the cross slope or the cross grade of the lanes, whereas the individual design road does not. In this case, we want to use flat roads to apply our vehicles to. So this is just, I've called it crazy road. You would obviously never build a road that looks like this, but for this purpose, for tracking horizontally and tracking vertically, we wanted to make it pretty crazy. So what I want to do is, starting here in InfraWorks, I'm going to simply export this data as an IMX and bring it into Civil 3D. So to do that, I'm going to come up to the settings and utilities, and I'm going to select Export IMX and wait for this to pop up.
Hey Willie, this is Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Could you also export as FBX?
You know, I have not attempted to export this as an FBX to see if the vertical and horizontal data come together. That's a good question. I will have to try that and report back. So in this case, I have not tried that. So Dave's question is exporting FBX. The option right above Export IMX is Export to 3D Model, which does include the FBX option. I have not tested to see if the horizontal and vertical data will export from that. So like as mentioned, so in this case, export to IMX, I'm going to select a polygon, and I'm just going to create a polygon around that crazy road shape. Doesn't have to be anything specific. Double click to finish. And I'm going to set my target coordinate system here to something other than the default UTM. Excuse me one second. Sorry about that. The default is a UTM 8410N. But I'm going to change this to a known coordinate system where this is in California, so CA 83123F. So I have worked in this coordinate system before. I could pull down the menu here, find whatever coordinate system I want to assign to it, but I happen to know what this one is. And I'm going to send this to the desktop, and I'm going to call it Crazy Road. And I'm going to click Export. And you'll see this is a fairly quick process. So actually, sorry, let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Get that guy launched again. So the workflow that we're doing here from InfraWorks, we're starting with a model builder project, creating the design road, and exporting to IMX. Now that we're moving to Civil 3D, we're going to import the IMX. We're going to assign the coordinate system to the project. We're going to create a feature line from the alignment for export to 3D Studio Max. So that's going to be our next processes here. So I will switch over to Civil 3D. I've got a brand new blank project started, blank drawing. So what I want to do is assign the coordinate system to the drawing before I apply any data so we can make sure everything lines up. So I'm going to use the mapcs assign command to do this, and this will pop up our coordinate system assign window. And from here I'm just going to type in again CA 83123F. You see it highlights. I'll click assign, and I can tell that that has been assigned because there's now a geolocation tab that pops up inside of my project. So from there I'm going to go to the Insert tab on the ribbon, and I'm going to find the InfraWorks 360 panel and click Open InfraWorks 360 Model. And then at the top, when I browse to this, it's already set to my desktop, so I'll find Crazy Road. But you'll notice down here at the bottom that under Files of Type, I can import an IMX, or I can directly import the SQLite, which is the default file type that InfraWorks uses. So I could do it that way if I so choose. I prefer to do an IMX of a very refined area. So I'll leave it IMX. I will find Crazy Road. I will open it. And the important thing here, the coordinate system from InfraWorks and the coordinate system assigned to the Civil 3D drawing match. And if they don't, you'll get a warning. You'll get a chance to set that coordinate system to verify that everything lines up. And then I will click Open Model. And now I have data imported from my InfraWorks model into Civil 3D. So the objects that come in from InfraWorks, I do have some alignments and I do have some surfaces. And you can see that these red roads here were the sketch roads. So these are just basically the 2D information from the sketch roads inside of the InfraWorks project, so the rails and the roads around the area. But back in Civil 3D, then you can see that this crazy road that I've got designed is here, and you can see that the finished grade contours match everything. So if we look at this, I'm going to switch over to a 3D view, an isometric view, and you can see that we've got several different surfaces listed here. I'm just, for ease of purpose here, I'm going to go ahead and turn these off. So I'll select the existing grade surface. I'm going to go to my Properties palette under Style, set this to No Display, turn that guy off, and then I'll pick this next road surface. I also set it to No Display, and I'll do for the third surface. So what you'll notice here is when we switch over to a 3D view, I still have my 2D information for my alignment. That's all of the horizontal information, including all my stations. But up here in space, I've got several 3D profiles that are assigned from this alignment. So I have 2D and 3D information inside the model that came from InfraWorks. So I'm going to switch back to the top view, give it a rotate, zoom back to the model, and now what I want to do, so our next step from here is we're going to export this data and go into Civil View extension using 3D Studio Max. But to do that, we have to use a feature line. The Civil View extension does not understand the alignment profile data. So what I want to do is go to the Home tab on the ribbon, come down to Feature Line, and select Feature Lines from Alignment, and then simply come down here and pick that road. And so I have some options when I create this. The first option is to create the feature line in a site. Now this is also important because the site is actually what gets exported to import to 3D Studio Max. So if I don't assign a site now, I'll have to assign that later. There is no sites in the default drawing, so I'll go ahead and create one, accept the default. We'll just call it Site 1. Click OK, so now you can see that this corridor, or this feature line, will be assigned to Site 1. And I also want to give it a name. For this purpose, we're only using one alignment, so if I don't give it a name, it's not going to be imperative. But if I'm doing more than one import, I want to have these road alignments named. So I'm just going to call this one Crazy Road. And then I need to set the profile. So under the profile list here, I'll pull this down, and I want to find Crazy Road. So when InfraWorks creates the IMX, it names the profile information, that finished profile data, the same as the road name. So if it happens to be a numbered road, it will be that number. If it happens to be whatever you call it, it's going to be, in this case, it's Crazy Road. So pick Crazy Road. There is an option to weed points. I'll leave that on. That's fine. And then down here at the bottom, there's also the option for create dynamic link to the alignment. This means if the alignment information changes, this feature line will change. I need to actually update some information of how this feature line is designed and created. So I'm going to uncheck that box, and I will click OK. And that weed box that was populated there now gives me the option to weed vertices. So there's some default settings for the weed vertices option. You can see that there's a triangle and circles and triangles and circles all the way along this feature line that's being created. And it tells me that based on the default settings of the grade and the length and the 3D distance, 0 of 49 vertices are going to be weeded from that line. This means that everything that's in that line is going to stay in that line. And I'm going to click OK to accept that. So if we click that feature line now, you can see that we have the grips all the way along the line that we saw before. Now this line itself is fairly smooth, but when we bring it into 3D Studio Max, it doesn't interpolate the curves. So you can see up here that there's still some curve pieces. So what would happen is anything that's a curve would be a straight line, which would give us kind of a rough transition around these corners. So what I want to do to help this feature line is I want to have it selected, and you can see that the ribbon for feature line Crazy Road is up, and I'm going to use the Insert Elevation Points. So I'll select this option, and then it's asking me, letting me select the feature lines or where I want to put the points. I'm going to use the I for increment option down at the bottom on the menu, and I'm going to tell it every 5 feet. And you'll see now that I've got a ton of points along this line, basically every 5 feet. So that gives me a nice smooth transition when we take our data into 3D Studio Max. So this will give us nice smooth horizontal transitions and nice smooth vertical transitions as well. So I have got my feature line ready to go, and from here we're going to export to 3D Studio Max. So if we go over to the output panel, or the output tab on the ribbon, you'll find the option under export, export to 3ds Max. And when I pick this, you'll see what comes up as default. So I have site, which is site 1, and that contains my feature line. I'm going to leave that checked. And we also have surfaces. I don't need the surfaces for what I'm doing now. I just need that feature line. So I'm going to uncheck the surfaces so they don't come in with my data. And I'm going to click export. So I'm going to save this to the desktop. And I'm going to call this one Crazy Road as well. And you can see that the file extension type is this VSP 3D file. I will click, back to my desktop there. And I will click save. No, sorry. Crazy Road desktop. There we go. So you can see that this has now exported just that site 1, which contains the one feature line. The extraction completed was 0.2 of a second. So pretty quick, pretty painless. And now, if we look at PowerPoint here, if we go to the next one, the next thing we're going to do, thanks Dave for the slide I borrowed yours from last time, because I really like the little excited guy here. So now we're going to import the VSP 3D file that we just created. We're going to use the Civil View extension using the Object Placement Style Editor to place the vehicles along the line. We're going to manually place some additional vehicles, and then we're going to export to Collada and bring that back into InfraWorks. So let's switch over now to 3D Studio Max. So those of you who are familiar with Max, good on you. I am not a Max person. I know enough to be dangerous, and that's why Dave's hanging out here, just like he's not great with InfraWorks, but he's great with Studio Max. We make a good team. So when you launch 3D Studio Max, you have this tab here for Civil View. And the first option, and the only option currently, is to start Civil View. This is what's called command load, meaning the Civil View extension does not load by default, and that helps 3D Studio Max to load faster each time. So if you want to use this, you would need to launch this on a regular basis. You can go into the options to have it launch by default. If you know that's what you're going to only use, that's an option. So now that I have Civil View, I have a couple of options, and I'm going to go to Civil View Explorer. And this is going to open up my Civil View Explorer window. I'm going to dock that to the left. So I've got it docked on the side here. We're going to use this quite a bit here over the next few minutes. And now I want to import the geometry. So I'm going to go back to Civil View menu, Geometry Import, Civil 3D, which is that VSP 3D file. I'm going to click Open, find it on the desktop, Crazy Road, select Open, and now you can see what's been brought in. So this is the land feature line. It now has 261 points along that line, and it's called Crazy Road. So I'm going to select it to import and say OK. And now this is giving me a global shift warning. Basically, it's telling me, yes, you're working in real-world coordinates. We understand that, but in order to retain a high level of accuracy, it needs to shift the model basically close to 0. So when you're working on it in 3D Studio Max. So these numbers are going to be important. We'll use these when we come back into InfraWorks with the data to shift these back, but I'll show you where you can find those other than this tab here. So I'll select yes to adopt the suggestions, and I'll select yes to let me know about the feature line information, and there's our data. So this little grid down here, the black X line is 0, 0 for this project. If I use Alt and middle mouse button, I can fly around and I can see that information from my feature line horizontally and vertically is there, and everything seems to be in order. So I'm going to switch to the top view. I'm going to slide this over to the side, And as I mentioned before, we're going to go to Civil View and we're going to use the Object Placement Style Editor. So there's some different options inside here: swept objects, road markings, rail objects, things like that. There's tutorials and everything that you need to know about these in the help files of 3D Studio Max. So if you have a question about what certain things do, go to the tutorials, go to the help file. All the information that you need is in there to figure out how these things work. So, Object Placement Style Editor. I'm going to open up this window, and this window is going to allow us to assign vehicles to this path. So the first thing that I want to do at the top here is add a new element. So I have to have an element to be able to add things like vehicles. If you see down at the bottom, there's a Furniture tab, trees, signs, cameras, primitives. So under Vehicles, I am going to select Cars, and you can see that there is a whole list of 16 different cars. There's SUVs, there's even an airplane. If you want to see what these are, you can right-click, go to Edit Object Definition, and it gives you a breakdown. So I can put in a 777 or 787 Dreamliner if I want to. If I want to bring in a bus, I can see the bus. If I want to bring in the vehicles, I can do that. So I can see what these vehicles are going to be. I'm going to use the Cars category because there's 16 options here. And what I need to do is I need to start out by setting a parent shape. So what do I want the vehicles to follow? So in this case, it's going to be this feature line that we imported, the path, whatever you want to call it, the spline. So I'm going to select parent shape. You can see that it highlights and it lets me pick that feature line. And the important part here is now that this box is populated with the crazy road. Now, there are some options here. Start is actually down on the south end of the road, and the finish is over here on the west end. Now, it gives me an option for a start station and an end station, and I've played with these numbers, but the problem is, and I just remembered again, that when I create this road design and I come down here, the center line of that road comes all the way to the center of the intersecting road. So if I were to leave that entire length, my vehicles are going to travel all the way into the center of this existing road. So what I actually want to do in Civil 3D before I export my line, and I did manage to forget this step again, but we can do it real quick. Let's see how much distance I need to trim back from this to bring that feature line shorter. So if I come over to Settings and Utilities, oh no, I'm sorry, go to the orange eye and come over to Analyze Your Model, and point-to-point distance, I can measure from the center just about to where those curb returns end. It's about 20 feet that I want to trim back on the west side of the road there. And if I come over to this end, I do have a double lane. And if I come to about the center of this lane, out to where the curb returns end, it's about 40 feet that I want to trim. So again, if I left it, I can. It's not a big deal, but the vehicles will travel all the way to the end of the path, even though in Studio Max, it does let me change the start and end station. I tried this, and it doesn't seem to have any effect on the length of that line. So in Civil 3D, what I will do quickly is draw a line, offset it, and I want to do 20. So 20, and then I want to use, I'm going to select the feature line, and I'm going to use the Edit Geometry Trim option, pick that, and then trim it back. So I've trimmed it by 20 feet now. I'll erase these two, and I'll do the same thing on the other end just real quick. So a line, and a line, offset 40 this time. There, again, select that feature line, let my ribbon change, use the trim under Edit Geometry, select my cutting edge, and my feature line, so now it's now trimmed back. I'm going to erase this guy, and then I've got my feature line trimmed back 40 feet and 20 feet on the corresponding ends. Export to Max again, uncheck my surfaces, and then my desktop here. Overwrite the crazy road that we just created, and we're good to go. We'll close it. Sorry about that. Go back to 3D Studio Max, and I will just delete this and I will use Civil View Geometry Import and Crazy Road again. Fortunately, it's not a horrible process, but it's one of those little things, if you forget, then you will need to go back and make that change. So there's my new feature line that's been shortened. Again, sorry about that. So I had it written down here in my notes to make the trim, but I missed it. So Civil View, Geometry, nope, Civil View, Object Placement Style Editor. So we've got this open again. I'm going to create a new element, and I'm going to set it to cars. I'm going to pick my parent shape. So now I've got that feature line selected again, and the feature line is now shorter by about 60 feet. And what I want to do, if we look at the next panel down, under parent shape, I don't have, or parent surface, I'm sorry, we don't have any surfaces imported here, so I don't need to worry about that right now. Under longitudinal placement, I have some options. I can do place a single object, multiple at a regular interval, or multiple at random stations. So we're talking about placing vehicles along this path. So I'm going to select multiple at random station. The default is 20 vehicles. That's a pretty high count. I'm actually going to set that to 5. And the start station will be 0. The end station will be 1099. Now, when I drew this in InfraWorks, I started at the south end and drew it to the north. Just for reference. Animation options, miles per hour. How fast are these vehicles going to travel along this feature line? I'm going to say 45. And if we move to the next panel, lateral placement. Horizontal offset. Well, if I apply these vehicles now, they're going to apply themselves straddling the center line of this road. So what I would do, the default lane width in InfraWorks is 11 feet, so I'm going to say 5.5 feet for a horizontal offset. Because we're traveling to the north, it's going to set it to the right. Vertical offset, I'm going to leave it 0. Crossfall, this is if you did use a component road or you did have a road with a slope on it, you could set the crossfall percentage. Rotation, I'm going to leave it 0. And the only other thing I want to check here is use random objects from the selected category. So if I click this box, it's going to use random objects from the cars category, and based on multiple at random station, it's going to set 5 vehicles along this path. So I can hit apply now. You'll see it build up across the bottom, and I now have 5 vehicles set along that path. And I can come over here to the timeline and select this button here and scrub the animation, if you will. So as I drag this across, you can see that the vehicles are starting to follow that path. And if we were to come in and look at that, yep.
We have a question. How did you get miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour?
That's the default in my Macs. I may have set it somewhere with your help.
Is if you look at customized unit setup, are you in imperial or metric?
Customized units, we are down, where's the units? There it is. I am in US standard decimal feet.
Okay. Oh, it's in the Civil View properties that David Lawrence says.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. So US standard, so the Civil View properties, what David Lawrence was referencing is if we come down here to Civil View and go to Preferences, then it should be under probably, yes, the Resource Kit paths, US Imperial. So that's set there. Localization is miles. So under localization, I have it set for miles per hour, which is here. But if I wanted it to be, feet or inches or meters or kilometers, I could change that, and that would change these options here. So that was Civil View Preferences under localization. So that's set. So in my case, I had set that in the preferences at some point to be miles per hour. So that's why I get miles per hour on my road here. So and that was a good question. Thank you. So as I was mentioning before, if we scrub along the road here, you can see that my vehicles are following vertically along that path. So yeah, the spacing on here is not great. So it's completely random. So I'm going to show you here in just a second how we can adjust the spacing where the vehicles line up. But what I want to do is I want to create vehicles going in the opposite direction of this road. So we'll have traffic going both ways. So I could come up here and add a new element, but because I have basically all the settings I already want set, I can right-click, copy this, go to the blank area, right-click, paste this, and now I have a duplicate copy of that. But what I want to do is I want the vehicles to go the opposite direction, so I need to change a couple settings. The most important one, well, one of them, is under animation options. My miles per hour setting, I'm actually going to make negative 45 miles per hour, and that's going to assign it to go negative backwards this way. My horizontal offset, I want to make negative 5.5, so it goes to the opposite side of the road, and I want to set my rotation to 180. So that's going to flip the cars. I still have cars selected. I still have 5, and that's fine. One thing to note here is if I hit apply again, it's going to reset these 5 vehicles that it's already placed on the other side of the road. So if I were to remove that other set and hit apply, it would actually remove those. So I'm going to leave them there. I'm going to let it reset the vehicles for both sides. And the reason that it does that is because it looks for everything that's set in the definition here for that object that you're creating. So you can see now that I've got some more random colors, some more random vehicles along my line 5 and 5. So if I scrub the animation now, you'll see that I've got vehicles going in both directions. So if you know you're going to do a two-way street, it's probably better to do both at the same time and hit apply and let them all come in. So now I have a random selection of vehicles from the cars category. What I want to do is show you how to manually place vehicles along this path. So I am going to close the object placement style editor. It's going to ask me if I want to save. What I would be saving is the information generated to create these new object definitions. So I'm not going to choose to save it this time because I can fairly easily recreate those. But what I want to do is if we look at this now, so the Civil View Explorer panel, this is part of the reason that I opened it. If I don't like the position of this car, I can select it, and you can see that the object list has opened up inside the Civil View window here. It tells me that it's a Mini Cooper. It gives me station control. I can slide this back and forth to place that vehicle anywhere I want to along the alignment. And I can also change the offset horizontally, vertically, and the rotation, and I can change the color. I cannot change the type of vehicle that's been assigned randomly from the list because once it's in there, it's in there. So if I wanted to change it to, let's say, black, I can change it to black, and now that vehicle is black. So if I don't like the color, or I've got too many colors of the same in a row, I can change those. But so let's look at manually placing a vehicle along this path. So I'm going to select the path. I'm going to come over to the Resources tab in the Civil View Explorer, and I'm going to select Vehicles. Now this is all of the vehicles that are available inside the list that we were just looking at in the Object Placement Style Editor. In this case, I want to add a bus. That's the GMC bus. I'll select it from the list. I will right-click and go to Place Object on Selected Shapes, and since I have this alignment path selected, I want to animate at a constant speed. So I want the bus to go from the left and work its way down to the right. So the constant speed is going to be negative 45 because it is going backwards along this alignment. If I don't set negative now, I'll only have the option to let it run positive. I can't change the speed later on from the Civil View Explorer. Select OK. It's going to put a bus at the end, but you can see that it is facing the wrong way and it's straddling the center line of my alignment. So I will select it, go back to the Civil View panel, and I will tell the horizontal offset to be negative 5.5, and I want to also set the rotation to 180. And when I come over here now, you can see that my bus is now facing the right direction along the alignment, and offset correctly. So as I start to scrub through this now, you'll see that my bus is now tied to the alignment horizontally and vertically. And if I wanted to set another vehicle, if I wanted to do pickup trucks or other types of trucks or vehicles in here, I could do that manually, or I could go back and use the object placement style editor. But again, once you hit that apply, it's going to reset whatever's on that line that you don't have set up already. So we're almost done with this, ready to go back to InfraWorks. The one thing that I want to check here is you'll notice at the bottom my frame is currently at 0 of 1,000. And if I'm going to pick this guy and I'm going to scooch him all the way to back to the start of the alignment. And as I scrub through this, you can see him continuing down the road. And when he gets to the end of the road, he's going to reset. But you can see that I'm at about frame 414, 15, 16, 17, and he's now reset back to the beginning. I've got 1,000 frames, so this is going to repeat again and go. So what I want to do is I want to trim this down to, what did we say, 417, to where he resets. So if I go back one frame, he's back at the end. If I go forward a frame, he's right at the beginning. I want to trim this timeline down from 1,000 down to 417. So that way, when the model repeats, there's no hiccups, there's no bumps, cars aren't resetting themselves in the middle of the animation. So to do that, I'll come down here so you can see that I'm at frame 417. Right next to that is the time configuration. I'll select that, and I will set my end time to 417. And you can see that my frames per second is set to 25. That is the default for the Silverview extension. Just if you were curious about what that was set to. The end time 417, I'll click OK. So now you can see my timeline has shrunk from 1,000 down to 417. So if I click play and we watch this go through, the vehicles will travel from the position that they start with or start at to the end, and when they reset, there won't be any overlaps. You won't see cars jumping to different positions as it resets, because as we found in InfraWorks, there's no control over the animation. It's either playing or it's not. So everything that we want these to do, we have to set up inside of 3D Studio Max before we export that. So I'm happy with the placement of the vehicles. I'm happy with the colors. If I wasn't, I could go through and do as many different things as I want to change those. The last
Willie?
thing that, yep.
Can I just jump in here real quick and say that if you were to adjust the frames per second, that would throw off the timing. So if you adjust the frames per second on this scene, it's going to modify the scene length, which will sort of undo. If you have this timed a certain way, it's going to undo that. So I think it's important to note that be careful about that
yes.
that dialogue.
So,
yep.
So the default is 25 frames per second, and as Dave mentioned, that's not necessarily the default for animated films or anything like that. It's typically like 24:96 or 23:96 or even 30 or 60. So keep that in mind, that if you do have to change your frames per second, that will change the length of time or the length of or amount of frames that it's going to take your vehicle to get from the start to the end. So just keep that in mind if you're if you're working through that. Thanks, Dave.
Sure.
All right. So the last thing that we want to do before we export to the Collada DAE file and get this ready for InfraWorks is, so we talked about this earlier. If I look at the scene, so Civil View Explorer, Civil Explorer tab, under scene settings, you can see that my global shift, global import shift, X and Y, are listed right here as a negative. Looks like 8 digits and a negative bunch of digits here as well. So what that means is it moved all of my information close to 0, 0. So as we worked through this, if I were to import this back into InfraWorks as is, it would come and line up roughly at the center of this data, which doesn't line up with our InfraWorks model. And David Lawrence, who had made a comment about the Civil View settings, preference settings, a minute ago, he is with AECOM, and I need to give a big shout out to David Lawrence for helping us work through this, because without this next step, we would be lost and still trying to line these things up manually. So what it amounts to is we're going to create, so I'm going up to the menu, create shapes, and I'm just going to create a rectangle. I'm going to create a rectangle that's larger than my project, and I'm going to center it on 0, 0. So when I export it, it allows the global shift that I place, and when I set it into my coordinate system, it allows everything to line up like it should. So to do that, we'll go create shapes, rectangle, and again, I'm going to make it bigger than my project. So you can see the center of that rectangle that I just created by the crosshairs here. I need to move that down to 0, 0, which is represented by the small black X here. So to do that, I still have it selected. I'll come up to the menu, select and move. I'm going to right click on that. And when I do that, it brings up the move transform that lets me type it in. So right now, I'm just going to set these to 0. So 0, tab, 0, tab, 0. So now you can see that the move tab and the 0, 0 of the project line up, and that's where I want it to be. It's a little bigger than it needs to be, so I could come over here to select and uniform scale and scale this down. Not necessary, but I want to make sure that my entire project remains inside of this rectangle. So right about there. That's as small as I can make it. So from here, what I need to do is set this to be what's called renderable, or allows it to be seen inside of InfraWorks. So I will come over to the Modify panel on the side here. I need to have this selected again. The Modify panel tells me that I have the rectangle and I need to expand rendering. And under rendering, I need to check these first two boxes, Enable in Renderer and Enable in Viewport. This allows these to be exported and seen, because if they're not exported and seen in InfraWorks, the data is not going to line up like it should. And then from there, I want to get rid of that. Come back. Oops, wrong pick box. So I'm just going to right-click on the rectangle, and I'm going to come down to the bottom, and I'm going to convert this to editable mesh. This is the other important part, the other important step here. So now on the list, it is an editable mesh. So if I don't set the renderer before I convert it to the editable mesh, I can't do that afterwards. That's something I have to do in that particular order. Move it, add the rendering option, and then convert it to an editable mesh. Now that it's the editable mesh, it's ready to go from Studio Max back into InfraWorks. So to do that, hit the Max Launch button, come down and select Export, and the file export type we are looking for is the Autodesk Collada file, the .dae extension, and I'm going to send it to the desktop again, and I'm going to call it Crazy Road, if you couldn't have guessed, and I'm going to click Save. So this is going to bring up the FBX version export options. If you haven't done this before, this little tab here that's Bake Animation will not be expanded. You'll want to expand that and ensure that the Bake Animation option, oop, I forgot one step, and this one's this one's actually very important before I export this. So last time, Dave Tyner had gone through and done a bunch of work on here. I need to see the desktop. Sorry. So Dave Tyner has created this convert convert to standard MS, which is a Max script. I'm going to simply drag and drop that into my Max file. So what happens when I do that is all the vehicles in the Civil View extension have some pretty non-standard textures applied to them. So by converting that Max script file in here, it's going to convert all of the textures that are applied to the vehicles to a standard texture type. That way when I export it and bring it into InfraWorks, all of the textures will be exported and imported correctly. Otherwise, you'll get some gray tires instead of dark rubber tires. You'll have some gray vehicles, things like that, because the textures don't all expand. And Dave has this readily available. Yep, sorry.
Yeah, on that, Willie, so the models have an arch and design material applied to them, and we need to convert them to a standard material so that InfraWorks will see the texture applied to the texture image, right, applied to the material, but InfraWorks will respect the color of the original, the arch and design material. So if it's just a color, it's okay. If it has a bitmap image attached to the material, it needs to be converted to standard.
Yeah, some of the vehicles that I had were when we were first going through this, some of the tires were gray and some of the tires were black. So yeah, it's just if it's a color it works, and if not, then it needs to have this conversion. This way, there's no question. Everything that's applied to the vehicle in 3D Studio Max will come through to InfraWorks. So thanks for that, Dave. So now I'm ready to export to DAE. Since I had it before, it's there. I will call it again Crazy Road. And click Save. I will make sure that my bake animation is checked. And if I am curious about what the settings are for frames per second, the frame rate is 25, which matches what I've set so far under the Colada data. And I will select OK. And there is a progress scope bar down here at the bottom. A couple things to note here. When you're exporting the DAE file, the longer lengths of road that you have set or vehicles that you have applied, the longer this process is going to take, because it's actually going through and individually exporting the vehicles. I think I have 11 set inside of here with a fairly short road. This will take 1 to 2 minutes. And sometimes this progress bar does appear to pause along the way, and then when it gets to the end, it just blasts across. So the other thing to note, and this is something that we came across, actually not at first, but this is something that we came across fairly recently. Somewhere, and this is either in 3D Studio Max converting to the DAE, or this happens in InfraWorks going from importing the DAE file. What happens is the data gets skewed, and I don't mean like a horizontal or vertical rotation. It would be, in fact, something similar to taking this right side of this rectangle and sliding it down by a small amount, which shifts the overall information from the road design here. And you'll see that here when I bring it in as the default. Okay, so just a heads up on that. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. You can see that there's a warning file while reading or writing the following location, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if I hadn't dropped in the Max script that Dave provided, I would have a huge list of warnings for textures and a huge list of textures that were not exported from the file. So because we dropped in that Max script file, we don't have any of the warnings. And I'm going to click OK. And now we're ready to go back into InfraWorks. So we'll go back to the model.
And what that warning is saying is that the road is a spline object, and DAE only understands geometry, and the spline is not geometry.
And it was saying that that geometry will actually not be exported as part of the export, right?
Well, that it can't export it because it's not geometry, but yes.
Okay. Okay, so it won't be included. So we'll get basically the rectangle and then the vehicles on their path. So I'm going to come back to InfraWorks. I'm going to add a 3D model. And go to the desktop. We will find crazyroad.dae. You can see that's about a 30 meg file, so it's not small even for the small amount of data that's there. Pops right in. Double click it to configure, and we are going to set this type to city furniture. I'm going to set the coordinate system. I could set it here, or I could set it under the position. I typically do it here. Just force of habit. Back to the CA83-3F, so it matches. And then the offset. So if we go back to Max and we pick, we pick the Civil View Explorer window. I gotta unselect that. Scene settings. Again, global import shift. So the X shift is a negative 623.0650. That moved This data was moved in the negative direction to get it close to 0. So inside of InfraWorks, when I configure it, I want to move it in the positive direction. So 623.0650, 623.0650, and then in the Y direction, 1866673. 1866673. So these are the default offset settings, and I'm not going to mess with the scale right now because I want to show you what happens. I found typically, even though my InfraWorks model was set to Imperial, the settings in Studio Max and Civil 3D were both set to Imperial, you don't see any vehicles traveling on the road here. But if I change this and look, you can actually see them underneath here. So even though everything is set to Imperial, Civil, InfraWorks, and Max, it still needs to be scaled by a factor of a foot to meters conversion. And this is something I'm trying to figure out why specifically it doesn't match up. But if you bring something in and it doesn't line up, look under your model. It's probably sitting down there below the surface. So if I come back here, double click to configure, set my scale, 3.2808, 3.2808, 3.2808, and I click close and refresh this time, you can see my vehicles traveling along my path. Now, when we really start to look at this, up in the top left, you can see that it's nice and get this out of the way. It's nice and lined up, but as it works its way across, the vehicles that are heading to the south are actually in the northbound lanes, and the vehicles in the northbound lanes are actually starting out kind of on the shoulder and eventually tie back in. So this is that skew that I was referring to. So to be able to fix this, what I did was I come in here to the offset and I started changing these numbers by a factor of 5. So out of the 7 digits that are there, I changed it by a factor of 5, and I eventually came to realize going positive was the wrong direction, but changing this from 50 to 37, and in the Y direction from 70 to 73, and so I started out X and got it lined up, and then changed the Y by a couple and got those lined up. By changing those numbers slightly, you can see now that everything lines up like it should, horizontally and vertically in my road. Now, the 13 and the 3 and the XY difference are going to be specific to this project, but when I discovered and figured out how to make this change, it literally took me about 2 minutes to make the change. So it's not a big deal, but it is something that you're going to have to be aware of. This is affected by the further away from the equator you are, the more the skew is going to apply, and the longer your road or the bigger your project. So if you have a massive project, you're going to get a bigger skew. So you're going to need to look at those numbers and play with those numbers. But again, it took me 2 minutes by a factor of 5, by a factor of 10, and I was able to get it pinned down. Everything lines up where it's supposed to, and that's it.
All right, Willie, that was awesome. We do have a couple minutes left, so I thought we might throw some questions out that came earlier on.
Sure.
Way back when you were importing the data into Civil 3D, David asked just to point out what happens if you don't provide a coordinate system in that step, and I think the answer is it'll prompt you for one. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So the question from David was when I brought that data in, bring in the, oops, that's export. So insert IMX. If I don't have one assigned to the drawing, it'll say unassigned like it does in the coordinate system for the model. You would actually have to set one before you bring that data in. So yeah, that's correct. It won't let you bring in the data without having a coordinate system assigned, one that actually matches the data, whether it's the UTM or state planes or whatever you happen to be working in.
All right. There was a question about a handout. I don't believe we have a handout for today's presentation, but the presentation is being recorded and will be posted later today. So if everything goes smoothly, within the next hour or two, it'll be available on the community site.
Hey, Eric.
Yes, sir.
There's another question here. What happens when you have cross slopes to the placement on the vehicles?
So I mentioned at the beginning that I use a design road rather than a component road, but inside of 3D Studio Max, when I was in Civil View and the Object Placement Style Editor, and I do need to create a new one real quick, but basically under the lateral placement, you can do the horizontal offset to get from the center line out. You can do the vertical offset, so if you do have a cross slope, but then the cross fall here, this is actually the reference to the cross slope of the road. So if you have a 2% grade or a 3% cross slope grade on here, this is where you would set it to apply it to the vehicles. So you can apply those to the vehicles, and you would probably also need to do a vertical offset, especially if you've got multiple lanes, because you can set the offsets different. You would need to start to apply that vertical offset. Now, one thing I did notice when we were manually applying, so resources, vehicles, and if I were to pick this guy and pick the Ford F-150 and then go back and animate at a constant speed like we did in 45, it's going to place that vehicle right here at the beginning. I need to select it, go back to Civil Explorer, but one of the options that's not available here is the crossfall. So I can change the horizontal offset, the vertical offset, and the rotation, but I cannot change that slope of that vehicle here. I would have to probably come in and do it manually. But one thing to note, and we didn't really cover this, is there's the vehicle and the wheels, and they're actually separate. So as you go through, the wheels travel. So if I want to remove one of these and I pick it and hit delete, I still have the wheels, and I have to deal with those separately. So they are separate from the vehicle. They do turn inside of Studio Max, but that the wheels turning does not translate into InfraWorks. But you would need to set that crossfall using, again, that object placement style editor. You could compensate for that if you did have a component road that had your crossfall slopes.
All right. Well, we actually have quite a few more questions, but we are out of time. So I'm going to see if we can maybe post those up to a blog or something of that nature, or maybe on the forum, the questions and answers that you guys have submitted. So I'm going to take back over the screen here, and I just want to remind everyone that, remove that out of the way, that our next webcast is coming up on Wednesday, January 6th after the holidays. Hope to see you all back, and lots of your friends as well. It's going to be a fantastic presentation from Jerry Bartles. He always he never disappoints. It's always going to be a great show with him. So don't miss that. And I wanted to thank Willie for doing a great presentation, and for Dave for chipping in as well. There's more to come from these guys on this topic, so keep watching for more installments on this topic, and we hope to see you soon. So from myself and from Autodesk, thanks to everyone for attending, and have a great holiday. See ya.